Alright guys, we're going to go over the Chapter 5, Section 2 notes on human genetic disorders. So you should have made a copy of your notes. If you're ready to go, we will get started. So some key terms that we need to define and that are going to be important throughout this section is genetic disorder, which is an abnormal condition that a person inherits through genes or chromosomes. A pedigree, which is a chart or family tree that tracks which members of a family have a particular trait. And then a karyotype, which is a picture of all the chromosomes in a cell. And the chromosomes in a karyotype are usually arranged in pairs. So, some causes of genetic disorders. These are caused by mutations in the DNA of genes. If you remember back in chapter 4 when we talked about mutations, we looked at how sometimes the DNA bases are added or taken away or swapped, and it creates a mutation in that strand and in that gene that causes an issue with what proteins produce. Then there are some other disorders that are caused by changes in the overall structure or number of chromosomes that a person has in the cell. And this can kind of happen in the process of mitosis or meiosis. It might not be like correctly separated, or more chromosomes might be added or taken away. So the first genetic disorder we're going to look at is cystic fibrosis. So this is a genetic disorder in which the body produces abnormally thick mucus in the lungs and the intestines. So then this thick mucus fills the lungs, and it makes it hard for that person to breathe and to function normally. So this genetic disorder, cystic fibrosis, is caused by a recessive allele on one chromosome. So this is caused, this genetic disorder is on our body cells, or like our chromosomes that are in our body cells, which are called autosomes. So it's not a sex-linked trait or disorder. Okay, so the recessive allele then is the result of a mutation in which 3 bases are removed from a DNA molecule, and so it messes up that order and what the message is. So some facts about cystic fibrosis. You don't have to write these in your notes. We're just going to kind of look through them. People with only one copy of the gene are called carriers, but they don't have the disease. So if 2 cystic fibrosis carriers would have a child, there's a 24 or 25% chance that the child would have it. There's a 50% chance that they would be a carrier, and then there's a 25% chance that they would not even be a carrier or have it. Some other facts is that it gives the person like very salty tasting skin. They have a persistent cough and sometimes cough up that phlegm or mucus. They have a lot of lung infections at times or get sick. They have wheezing or shortness of breath. There's poor growth or weight gain. And then they have like really bad poop. And it can also cause male infertility. About 30,000 people have cystic fibrosis, so about 70,000 worldwide. There are about approximately 1,000 new cases diagnosed each year. And then more than 75% of people are diagnosed by the time they're 2 years old. And then half of the population is 18 or older. So then the next genetic order or disorder we're going to talk about is called sickle cell disease. So this disease affects hemoglobin, which is a protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. If you remember from our blood basics notes, we talked about those different components of our blood. So the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets, and the plasma. And so hemoglobin is one of those proteins in that red blood cell that helps. So with sickle cell disease, they're actually a sickle-shaped red blood cell instead of a nice little like circular cell. And so it causes blood vessels to clog and they can't carry as much oxygen. Um, and how this disorder is the alleles are codominant with the normal allele. So if a person has two sickle cell alleles, they will have the disease. But then a person with one sickle cell allele, they'll produce both normal hemoglobin proteins and abnormal hemoglobin proteins. Because it's codominant, it kind of shares it and can do both. So this is what a normal or healthy red blood cell looks like on the left here. It's able to flow and there's a normal shape, but then that sickle cell red blood cell you can see kind of has that, it almost looks like a banana shape or like a boomerang. And so that starts to clog and pile up and it restricts blood flow and can increase clotting. So some facts about sickle cell disease. There's a group of inherited red blood cell disorders. The healthy red blood cells are round, while the sickle cells are like more bent. Sickle cells die early, so this also affects the amount of red blood cells you have in your body. And so when they are traveling through the blood vessels, they get stuck. And so this can cause pain for the person, and it can cause infections or even strokes with clotting. It's a genetic condition that is present at birth, so it's inherited when the child receives two sickle cell genes, so one from each parent. So this would be a sex-linked trait or a sex-linked genetic disorder because it's inherited from birth. So it's diagnosed by a blood test, usually found during birth when like newborn babies get all their different tests and screenings. It can be diagnosed before birth even. There's different tests you can do. But because children with sickle cell disease have a higher risk of infection, they usually want to diagnose it early and get treatment started. Right now, the only cure is bone marrow or stem cell transplant to kind of help replace um, those bad red blood cells and put new cells in that can produce correct blood cells. The next genetic disorder we're going to look at is hemophilia, and this is kind of the opposite of sickle cell. It's another blood disorder, but it causes blood to clot very slowly or even not at all. So we talked about how those platelets and proteins in our blood help clot, and hemophilia produces or doesn't produce one of those proteins that we need to help our blood clot. So with this, it increases the risk of internal bleeding if you get like even just small bumps and bruises because your body can't repair that damage. And so you're going to have a lot of internal bleeding, or if you get a cut or a scrape, like you have to be very, very careful because you can lose a lot of blood. So this is also considered a sex-linked genetic disorder because it's caused by a recessive allele on the X chromosome. So it occurs more frequently in males than females since it's on the X chromosome. Remember, females can have two X chromosomes, whereas males only have one X chromosome. So if they get that X chromosome with the recessive allele, they're going to have the disorder. Some information, hemophilia A is the most common type of the condition. So 1 in 4,000 to 1 in 5,000 males worldwide are born with this disorder. And then there's hemophilia B, which is about a 1 in 20,000. Hemophilia causes unexplained and excessive bleeding from cuts or injuries, or like after surgery or dental work, unusual bleeding after vaccinations, pain, swelling, or tightness in your joints just from maybe blood pooling or like it trying to move, blood in your urine or your stool, nosebleeds that just kind of occur. And then in babies, it can have unexplained irritability. If they, get hurt, they can't explain what's happening, and it can cause more pain for them as well. Then, some treatments for this is that people can get regular infusions of DDAVP, which is a clotting factor to kind of help their blood clot a little bit better. Um, they can take clot preserving medications. They can get different sealants. They can go through physical therapy and different other treatments. So the last genetic disorder that we are going to talk about with our notes is Down syndrome. And this is when a person's cells have an extra copy of chromosome 21. So chromosome pairs 1 through 22 are all autosomes, so they are all our body cells. So this is a body cell. So instead of having just a pair of chromosomes 21, a person with Down syndrome actually gets one more copy of that 21st chromosome. So they have 3 instead of 2. So generally, Down syndrome occurs when the chromosomes fail to separate through the process of meiosis when they're being created. Um, and so they, just the way that they split, it has that extra chromosome. Um, so another common thing with Down syndrome is usually people have heart defects, but they can definitely be treated. I know a few people that have Down syndrome, and all of them that I know of have had heart issues, or they have like holes in their heart that are detected at birth. And so when they're babies, like they've had to go through 2, 3, 4 heart surgeries to repair that. And now they are like running around and thriving and going to school and just fine. So it is at least something, if there's other defects, some of them can be treated and managed. So some different features and characteristics of Down syndrome are just the different facial features with a smaller head or shorter neck. Um, Sometimes they have like more slanted eyes or different shaped like little ears. Um, Generally, there's poor muscle tone that usually you have to go to therapy for then. Um, Smaller fingers and hands, so they're a little bit stubbier. Um, and then sometimes they even have like white spots on their eyes. So, some different things with Down syndrome. Mothers can get screening tests while they're pregnant to see like what the genetics of their baby is to see if they have a likelihood of Down syndrome. And they can measure different parts of the developing baby to see if it's growing within a certain parameter. There is also diagnostic tests that can be taken, and then intervention programs to help like babies and young kids at an early age to start working through their different activities, and then even team care. So you have a team of specialists that help with medical care and then help them with like their therapy and education and moving forward. So, some other things with genetic disorders that help us um, track genetic disorders and see what like the likelihood could be and look at it. One of those examples is a pedigree. So a pedigree is considered a chart or similar to like a family tree that tracks which members of a family have a particular trait. So the trait in a pedigree can only be an ordinary trait, so like a widow's peak or a genetic disorder such as cystic fibrosis. Um, and it also isn't necessarily like a definite answer because sometimes traits still have, multiple genes that control them. So you can only really look at those ones that have maybe multiple alleles or just like one specific allele that you know goes for it. So pedigrees can be used to help manage genetic disorders. Doctors only had Punnett squares and pedigrees to help them, but now we even have karyotypes, which can help diagnose genetic disorders. And so then when we diagnose them, they can get help through medical care, education, job training, and even other methods, therapy, and other connections. So karyotypes then help detect those genetic disorders because they are looking at the specific chromosome. So it's like taking a picture of all the chromosomes in your cells. And then the doctor can look at that to see if they're looking normal or see with like Down syndrome if they have that third chromosome on chromosome 21, or maybe they're missing something, things like that. So in a karyotype, again, it's the picture of all the chromosomes, and the chromosomes are arranged in their pairs. And so it's just able to reveal if the correct number was there, if things got separated properly, and so on. So some other things with genetic disorders and different like ways that people can get help is through genetic counseling. Um, so a couple that has a family history of a genetic disorder, or if they want to see if they have a higher chance of having like children with genetic disorders, they can go to a genetic counselor. And then that person can help them understand their chances or give them resources and tools for how to work through that genetic disorder or prepare for it. So these genetic counselors are able to use karyotypes, so looking at those chromosomes. They can look at pedigree charts to track what the likelihood is for generations, and even use Punnett squares to see what the probabilities could be. So dealing with genetic disorders then, obviously a genetic disorder changes a person's life and can pose serious challenges, but there is help. So people can receive medical treatments for some of their disorders, such as physical therapy, or they can take vitamins or medication to help. They can also receive education and specific job training. So people with genetic disorders still can function and be a part of society. So once you are done with these notes, if you missed anything, you can rewind this video and go back through and fill in what you need to. Otherwise, please make sure your 5.2 notes are submitted and then you are good to go.